this. I think that a lot of people in comics obviously choose to self-publish, which is great, awesome, and they use Kickstarter to fund their project, which is also great.
Yeah.
But you can fall into a lot of problems and pitfalls with Kickstarter, so you really have to, because I've done at least 2 Kickstarters now to self-publish some of my work, and you can really easily mess up doing a Kickstarter, like not.
In this episode of Artist Motivation, we got G.E Gallas, and she is going to tell you exactly how to actually launch a Kickstarter successfully as a comic, manga, or graphic novel artist. Now, as you know, if you're wanting to do a Kickstarter, you got to do this with a right plan and a right action. You can't just finesse it. You can't just do a random Kickstarter and expect people to know about it and donate to your cause. So in this episode, we'll go into details and she'll break it down for you. And we hope you get so much value from this episode. All right, let's do this.
I'm mostly self-taught. I studied undergraduate at NYU, New York University, at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study. So that means I created my own major. My shorthand for that is cross-cultural storytelling, where I kind of studied in different cultures, the commonalities in their storytelling structures in movies and books, literature, film, etc., graphic novels and comics. So that kind of gave me a good foundation on how I go about writing and then illustrating my own comics and graphic novels. I'm very much into historical fiction, which involves a lot of research on my part, both historical facts as well as visual inspiration. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably best known for my graphic novel, The Poet and the Flea, which is about the 18th century poet-painter William Blake, which some of you may have heard of.
Right. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess what inspired you to actually do that?
Which part?
Well, I mean, just the whole journey of wanting to be an artist.
Yeah, I guess I've really been just drawing and making my own stories since I was, as long as I can remember. And, as a kid, I was always, I never, when I was in elementary school, I would make up my own characters and designs for those characters, and I never really went through to the end of the process, as in I didn't make a full-length comic. It took me until about high school to make my own full-length comic, which, looking back on, that comic, it's a little embarrassing.
Right.
But it definitely, high school was kind of when I was able to put all the different elements together into a finished product. And ever since then, I've just kind of been learning from that first experience and learning every time I make a new graphic novel. So, yes.
Wow. For you to have did you actually complete that whole series in high school, or?
Yeah, it was an 88-page comic, and I even went as far as finding a printer in my area to print it. And I think that they didn't really know what to make of me, because I think this was kind of before the self-publishing craze kind of launched. So they kind of, this printer kind of didn't know what to do with me, but they just followed my instructions, and so I had this printed book, and I still have a bunch of copies somewhere.
Jeez, that's pretty awesome though. Wow, you went as far as printing it. That's called starting and finishing what you start, right?
It's true. That's the goal.
No, I mean,
doesn't always work out that way, but it's the goal.
Right, because sometimes as artists, we start a project and we're like, man, this is really good, and then we get sidetracked because of life or circumstances and stuff like that, and we never finish the project. And there's a feeling of finishing something that you started that you get from that you just want to do more of that.
Exactly. It's kind of addictive being able to finish something.
Exactly.
And letting go of it.
Right.
Out in the world, I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Exactly. So that's pretty awesome. So I gotta ask this, but artists out there, they're really finding it pretty difficult to get their name out there and just their work out there. So what have you found and discovered that has been pretty helpful to your success as well as getting yourself out there and letting people know who you are and just the things that you're creating?
I guess what I try to do is I'm always having a presence online and trying to follow other artists, because I think that we're our biggest fans.
Exactly.
So just trying to make my own network of fellow comic book artists. Every year I go to the Small Press Expo which is only about 20-30 minutes from where I live.
Oh, that's nice and convenient.
It's actually a little embarrassing. I always tell people, because the room where Small Press Expo happens is literally the same room that I had my high school prom in.
No way!
Really? It's a little bit strange for me, but so doing SPX every year, you meet a lot of people, you meet new people, you meet people you met the last year and the year before that, and then connect with them online. So that's a really good way of getting a network going. And so I do that. I do DC Zine Fest as well every year, so just kind of getting to know the people who are trying to do the same thing that you're doing in a way is definitely helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, because it can't just always be read my stuff, buy my stuff, and you don't even get to know who's actually in your community that's actually on the same journey as you, right?
Exactly.
So I think a lot of artists kind of struggle there because, again, I get it, you want to, put your work out there, you want people to support you, but
yeah,
how can you want support if you're not even supporting, right?
Exactly. Well, and I think something that's interesting is that zine fests I think that comic book people don't always realize that zine fests are a great place for comics, because the zines don't have to be comics. They can be poetry and photography and whatever else. It can be anything you want it to be, but the thing with zines is that it's always something original. You don't really see fan art too much at zine fests. So if you're trying to make your own original comic, then a zine fest is a really great place to start.
Ooh, dropping them diamonds on people. You hear that? Go to Zine Fest if you're creating your own original work. I mean, you heard it here. That's awesome. And you go every year, right?
Yeah, at least to DC Zine Fest. I'd love to venture out of state. I've done Richmond Zine Fest one year, which is a pretty cool event. But I'd like to, go to visit other state zine fests in the future as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you gotta kind of broaden your horizons and expand the network, like you were saying, right?
Oh, exactly.
That's awesome. So, okay, you told us how to promote, but what are some critical mistakes that you have made and that you've also seen other artists make that you think you would recommend them avoid?
That's a good question. There's so many options how I can answer that. I think that, I'll go with this. I think that a lot of people in comics obviously choose to self-publish, which is great, awesome, and they use Kickstarter to fund their project, which is also great. But you can fall into a lot of problems and pitfalls with Kickstarter. So you really have to, because I've done at least 2 Kickstarters now to self-publish some of my work, and you can really easily mess up doing a Kickstarter, like not putting in enough shipping, money for shipping, like you have to calculate what kind of money you need for people to fund it, and you don't want that to like eat into the small profit that you might make that way. So just there are a lot of, like, if you want to do a Kickstarter for your comic, like it's definitely worth looking at successful Kickstarters and Kickstarter advice sites, because it's so easy to make a mistake with your Kickstarter campaign.
Wow. And that, you know what? You just touched on a really, really sensitive topic. I mean, there's a lot of, artists that are doing like Kickstarters, and I wonder if they ever considered the fact of like shipping costs and, other costs that go into, a Kickstarter that could eat into their profit, right?
Exactly. I mean, I've heard horror stories, Kickstarter horror stories. So.
And and I have as well, like in the sense of like I've heard it from both sides, like from one on the artist perspective, and then 2 from the consumer perspective, and it's just like, oof, geez. We just got to do it right. That's the bottom line.
Exactly.
So that's awesome. So is there any other mistakes that you have seen as well that artists should avoid as well?
I'm trying to think, because there's so many choices, but I also don't want to insult anyone by accident.
It's okay, just be yourself and just tell it like it is. That's your truth. So
I mean, like, I guess one of my personal pet peeves is going back to like people selling fan art. Like, I know that's I have nothing against people drawing fan art. Like, good for you.
Yep.
Like, get those people interested in your art that way. I know there are a bunch of like people who are famous now who started out doing fan art, and then that's how people got interested in their original stuff.
Yep.
But it just kind of bothers me when I see people selling fan art. I know that's a way to like make money, but it's like, at least maybe make it like a parody, because that's okay to sell. Like, if you're gonna be like, I'm doing Adventure Time fan art, but they're dressed as Sailor Moon, like that's a parody, you can get away with that.
Yeah.
When you see just like straight up fan art, I'm like, oh god. And there was that recently, I totally don't remember the name of this artist, unfortunately, off the top of my head, but there was recently like a Kickstarter of like cute mini baby versions of Marvel and Disney characters, and it raised like a ton of money.
Oh my god.
But because it was over a certain amount of money, the lawyers from Disney like shut it down, like got Kickstarter to shut it down, and like that it was like just a total train wreck. So you have to be careful about fan art.
Wow. Seriously, I didn't even hear about that. Wow.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up, because I saw it on like a YouTube video of this person talking about their experience, and I was like, oh my god, I never want that to happen to me or anybody else. So
yeah, I mean, is it, and so what's your perspective if like artists are trying to basically raise money, and so they'll do commissions for people that request that type of fan art? Is that okay? Or
I think that's okay. I think like the danger is like if you're putting it out there in a certain way, then it's like you could get in trouble. But if it's on a small scale, you probably won't get in trouble, but it's still like, it makes me nervous, I guess. Like I worry for people, and I don't want them to get in trouble for fan art. So
it's so true, because we're living in a world where copyright, even though on a smaller scale is like downplayed, that I've seen that people are stealing other people's art and they're not giving them credit, and then at the same time, people who are doing the fan art, but they get hassled and harassed because like, hey, you're trying to sell our work and you don't have the license authority to do so. So shut it down, or we'll take you to court.
Exactly, and that's also not to say that you can't do. Like, if it's something in the public domain, like, that does, like, I do that I use stuff from the public domain all the time. Like, my William Blake graphic novel, it's like, he's been dead for a couple hundred years now, so it's safe to use his, or, do essentially fan art of his art.
Yeah.
So, it's like, if you're doing someone who's been dead for over 100 years, you're probably safe.
Right. That's very true. So it's that fine line that everybody should be careful of, right?
Yeah, exactly. At least to be aware.
Because some people get hit with it and they're just shocked. They're like, what?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. Like,
Exactly.
So that's actually really awesome. So that's good tips to actually take away from. And the one thing that I see artists struggle with is and I'm going back to the beginning with you, is motivation to finish what you started. Like,
right.
What drives you? Like, what keeps you going to like finish the work that you started?
Mm-hmm. I think that I have over the years kind of developed a system that works for me. Like, I've developed a way to plan a project so that I don't get frustrated with it, and that I have a good plan, like short-term goals and long-term goals.
Mm-hmm.
These comic books, it takes a long time, especially if you're doing it by yourself. Or even as a team of a writer and an illustrator. And if you're super lucky, you might, like the more mainstream comics, you have like a bunch of people working on the same comic. But it's still a lot of work, and a lot of time goes into comics. So I've kind of developed a way to outline the story from beginning to end, and I always do thumbnails on top of that, so that I kind of plan out every page before I even start drawing the final version.
Mm-hmm.
And doing those steps really helps me see, like, okay, I'm like 25% done now, and 50% done now. Like, it's kind of like, if you can see the end of the tunnel, then it's easier to get there.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And just like keeping myself inspired. I mean, that's a tough thing to do, but I think that, I'm always kind of trying to learn from, if I'm watching like a movie or reading a book or another comic book, just like seeing what other artists, what other creative people are putting out there, and like what I can learn, whether good or bad,
right.
Something to avoid, or like something that I don't personally like for my own writing.
Mm-hmm.
But just learning from consuming media is like super important to me, to always be constantly like being like, oh, there's this movie, I really liked how they did that, and how can I use that in a way in my own work. So that keeps me inspired, and I think that's important to reaching the end of a comic.
Oh yeah, definitely, because I like to be real about it. I mean, there's nothing that truly is original. Everything is sort of a remix. I understand that people have this certain creation, but if you take certain elements, you can find that it's been used somewhere else. And so it's just important to, just like you said, to expand what you're exposing yourself to, different medias, because if you just always stay in your niche, then you won't be able to get inspiration just by staying there, and that's why you kind of want to go outside of that niche to like get inspiration, like you were saying. So man, you just dropping diamonds for everybody. What is going on? That's awesome though. So with with some of your works, I gotta ask the most important question. You know, what is it that you're trying to aim at, or what is it that you're trying to say with your work? You know, is there
right? I think that with all the comics that I've done, I definitely want there to be an entertainment factor to it, but also I want people to have like a kind of like an emotional reaction to it. Not that it has to be like emotional, but to have like some kind of thought-provoking reaction to it, and hopefully come away with something that they had never thought of before, or, you know, some information that was unclear to them before. And like that kind of goes along with the historical fiction that I do, is that I want to take something that maybe people are slightly familiar with, but not really, and kind of make it accessible and where people can like more easily understand it and appreciate it that way. And that goes for both my William Blake graphic novel as well as my new graphic novel, The Plague and Dr. Came, taking like this image of the plague doctor that you see all over the place, tattoos, cosplayers, and like, hey, this is the history behind it. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. and that's actually that leads into my next question, which is, you know, can you tell the people, you know, what is in the pipeline, you know, what is coming out, you know, that you're working on, and provide a little bit of a teaser?
Sure, yeah. So right now I am working on crowdfunding my graphic novel, The Plague and Dr. Came. So it's, as I said, it's about a plague doctor, 17th century plague doctor, and it's a dark comedy, but it's also very based in historical facts. So you know, the medical treatments of the day I've researched, and kind of finding the humor in those treatments, because most of them are just totally ridiculous. Like, oh, let's try rounding up emeralds and eating it, and that's gonna cure the plague for you.
What?
Like that was a real treatment. Or like dunking a robe in garlic and then wearing the robe.
Wow.
And that's to cure the plague.
Wow.
So it's kind of like amazing how far we've come in this day and age, that we have antibiotics and everything. But so just kind of, I thought all of these different treatments, to our perspective, you know, looking back on these treatments that are a couple hundred years old, and how far we've come, and just the humor that's naturally came out of that.
Yeah. Wow. That is crazy. Dunking a robe in garlic and then wearing it? Jeez.
Yeah, or like, you know, milk stuff with like milk, like letting like a saucer of milk at your door, and like that would cure the plague. Or also a lot of bloodletting and leeches.
Oh my
you know,
goodness.
That's fun.
Jeez. Oh my goodness. How long did it take you to actually like create this? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, it's been kind of like an ongoing process. I don't think it really took me that long actually to write the script. So, you know, before I start drawing anything, I usually write a script for myself to follow. That probably took me like a couple months, and then I've just been kind of bouncing back and forth between different projects. So it's been a couple years since I wrote it, and I've done a number of pages for it so far, but when it's done, it'll be 100 pages, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Ooh, that is awesome. That is awesome. So, you know, we gotta ask this important question, and it revolves around money. So, can artists make it out there, you know, in this niche, and make money and still live comfortable, or do they have to like scrap along? I mean, from your perspective, can artists make it?
That's a good question. I think that that's something that I'm definitely struggling with. I think that it's interesting because this new project I'm doing is with a publisher called Unbound, and they're a London-based publisher, and they use crowdfunding for all of their books. So this is kind of like a brand new thing for me. I don't make much money on my own self-published work, so this will be interesting to see if I can make any money through publishing with a real publisher. But I definitely have side gigs. I have a small business, so I'm just kind of juggling a bunch of things at the same time.
Yeah, you have a business and you're doing this? Like, how are you managing your time?
It's tough. Luckily, my small business, I create chocolate bars that are, it's called Open Book Chocolates, and all of the flavors are based on my favorite classic novels. So I have like an Alice in Wonderland bar, a Sherlock Holmes bar.
What?
So that kind of takes up my weekends because I sell them at farmers markets. So, whenever I'm not working on my small business, I work on my comics. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Jeez, you're just busy. My goodness.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like I have like 3 or 4 full-time jobs at once, but
yeah, because I mean it is right. I mean you have a business. I mean even your comic, your graphic novel is a business. So I mean you are basically occupied. Plus you have life, which is another job. So
yeah. Then also like marketing myself is a job, and as well as whenever crowdfunding is always a full-time job. Like whenever I did a Kickstarter, it was like that was what took up my time, trying to like bother people, message them and get them to spread the word or support it. So that's always like a full-time job on top of everything else.
I can only imagine. I mean, so like that raises a question, but like doing the Kickstarter, what's the best way? Like, if you could say one method, what is the best way to actually promote it?
I think that the best way is to not just jump into a Kickstarter and without having a following beforehand. I've seen a lot of people who have like maybe 100 people following them on Twitter, and they do a Kickstarter and it fails, and they're like, why didn't anybody do this? And so you really have to cultivate your followers over, like, I don't know, I've probably been on Twitter now 10 years, so you have to really cultivate those followers before you try launching a Kickstarter project. That's the most important thing I would say before launching your Kickstarter.
Wow, that is so important, is to actually have an audience that you have cultivated, like you said, and therefore you actually have people who would actually care to actually help you with your Kickstarter.
Exactly.
So practical. Yet nobody does it. So that's very interesting. So, I got to say this. I mean, this has been really, really awesome having you on the show. But you got to tell us, some words of wisdom, that you would like to impart on the show.
Okay. I think that my words of wisdom, these are the words of wisdom that I received for my NYU Gallatin graduation, was that the Dean of Gallatin said basically that you don't know until you apply. So if you don't apply to something, whatever that thing is, if it's a job or an opportunity or a publisher or whatever, if you don't do it, then you're not going to get a yes or a no. Like, of course, if you apply, you might get a no. That's always a possibility. But if you don't do it, then you'll never know.
Wow.
And that really has stuck with me over the years. And, as far as Unbound, this publisher goes, I decided to submit my work to them, and they liked it and want to publish me. So I would have never known that if I hadn't been like, okay, I have to apply to this and see where it goes. So that's my best advice, my words of wisdom.
Ooh, those are some good words of wisdom. I mean, you want to put yourself in the race, and actually see what happens, because most people do is they take themselves out of the race before the race even started.
Exactly.
So I think that's awesome. So that was super, super, super awesome. G.E Gallas, thanks for being on the show and providing hope and inspiration to the people. Where can the people find you at and connect with you?
Well, I have a website, which is just G.E Gallas, GALLAS.com, and I'm on Twitter, which is @GE Gallas, and Instagram, which I think is The Poet and the Flea. Also Unbound. Check out Unbound, because they have some really cool graphic novels, not just mine, but some other really cool graphic novels on there.
Ooh, that is awesome. All right, Mastermind family, that is going to do it for the show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.